shall we start with this gentleman?
Great talk, thank you very much, Peter Strachan. Will, could you comment on the impact of technology on that equation? Because in my thinking, technology can be a positive to the eye, or it can be a negative to the eye as well.
Indeed, it can be, and in fact, a lot of the solutions that are being talked about turning that emissions curve around are based on technology. There's been a lot of talk that's already occurring in terms of some decarbonisation of economies, but in fact, what you find is that the surge in consumption is actually outpacing the change in technology at present. So I would say at the moment, technology is still not quite the biggest driver. The biggest driver is affluence of those three. But technology has a huge potential to play a role, indeed.
Will, I have to correct quite a serious error in one of your slides because I think it's misleading, and it's the same error that George Monbiot has made in a recent article of his, where you've compared population growth, and you said population has grown 7-fold, but the economy has grown 50-fold. What that shows is that per capita economic growth has grown 7-fold and population has grown 7-fold.
Yes.
So in fact, on your own figures, the two factors are absolutely equal in their effect.
Now, the 50-fold is indeed that aggregate. I put that there because that's really the impact that the Earth system feels. So indeed, you are right. It's made up of those two factors.
I was just wondering, in terms of the sustainable footprint quadrant in development of countries, what do you see as some of the key factors that developing countries and developed countries need to take to reach that sustainable development quadrant?
Oh, gee, that's a difficult question. I think if I can just scope it down a bit to the climate issue as one of the important aspects of sustainable development, really the biggest stumbling block, in my view, that's been out there so far is the equity issue of how are we going to take into account that CO2 is a long-lived gas. Most of it that's up there has come from the developed world, yet the increases in contemporary times, the last decade or so, are ramping up fast from India and China and so on. But historically, they haven't been the big problems. So until we can get fair ways of allocating, who is responsible, past, present, and future, and what's a fair way to go forward with this, I think that's going to stymie, and it's going to stymie many other aspects of sustainable development. So I've often said that unless the equity issue, and that's really the equity issue on a global scale, is addressed and addressed properly, we're not going to achieve sustainability.
Excuse me. I think the most frightening statistic that you presented was the one on cod. And I'm wondering if you know what it would take to bring cod back, or is it past the point of no return? And I presume that also what's happening to cod would happen to any of the fisheries in the ocean.
Not necessarily, because they're all different ecosystems. What happened to cod is that it flipped to another ecosystem. There's actually a thriving ecosystem there, but cod's not a major part of it. So that often happens in biological systems when enough pressure is put on, say, on a top predator like cod was. The ecosystem will respond in a way, it'll flip to something else. There are other organisms there. And in fact, inshore, what's happened is a lot of the crustaceans have really exploded in population, like lobsters and crabs. And so there's a booming industry off Canada now in terms of lobsters. And when the cod was the top guy in that ecosystem, lobsters were relatively scarce. So ecosystems do shift because of human pressure on them. Will it come back? Well, we can't manipulate it to come back. That's something that the ecosystem itself is going to have to deal with given other pressures. We don't see any sign after fishing was banned in '92 that ecosystem is returning to what it was. So it may have simply changed state, and it'll stay in this new state for quite some time.
Chris Watson. Look, Will, I was sad that one of your graphs didn't show anything specifying on Australia, where the population component, the driver in Australia, is very high indeed, 1.5%. That's 300,000 a year. And if you look at the UN data, where class is a less developed country, Europe is virtually steady. So if we should have had drivers of the population, and let alone our highest, apparently, per capita carbon emissions.
Yeah, I didn't, as I said, I only had 20 minutes, and I wanted to focus on the global aggregates without going into national details. Because I wanted to make the point about the Earth system as a whole, that in fact it operates as a single system, and you need to look at the human enterprise at some point in its totality. That's not negating anything at all what you said, and I suspect other speakers will hopefully bring up the points that you talked about.
My question is to the speaker, Professor Steffen. My name is Otto Müller. I'm coming all the way from WA. And in WA we have a State of the Environment Report 2007, and believe it or not, on the first few pages there is a headline which is called Fundamental Pressures last year. And the fundamental pressure says population and consumptions. We have heard that a number of times already, those brief presentations here this morning. And politicians as well as economists, or in our case the mining industry, is pushing the population increase by claiming there's a lack of labor. And of course the politicians claim we have to consume more in order to keep the wheels of the economy running. Now how on earth can we as ordinary people push it ever more? Because those two comments in that State of the Environment Report will make no difference in the state of Western Australia. Because also, mind you, the university are also playing their roles in order to push that sort of thing along. Thank you.
No, it wasn't a question, was it? Yeah, okay, look, that's a very long, complex process, and in modern democracies, you'll only get it fixed when a large segment of the population believes that it's a problem and is willing to try to do something about it. I think that is building. It's building around the climate issue, it's building around biodiversity issues, around water issues, but it takes time for that to happen. But certainly you can see a lot of signs that, things are starting to move.
Well, you didn't mention the impact of military expenditure on the environment. The US Congress recently passed a bill to vote $615 billion to what they call military security for 2008, and only $9 billion for climate change mitigation. And yet the Pentagon says that climate change is a bigger threat than terrorism. How do you cope with that kind of hypocrisy?
Well, we could go on for hours on that, I think. Yeah, I mean, it's you know, one could argue it's part of this complex of driving ever more production and consumption, and of course, for whatever reasons, the U.S. feels it has to defend that way of life.
Conclude those questions, and so many thanks to Will for the presentation and the stimulated response from the audience.